If hypocrisy were a renewable resource, Pam Bondi could power the Eastern Seaboard and still have enough left over to light up every studio camera waiting for a gotcha clip. Because what you're about to see is the Justice Department treating oversight like a suggestion box they set on fire, and treating due process like it's an optional subscription upgrade. Pam Bondi sat under oath, on camera, in front of Congress, and effectively confirmed she's compiling a secret list of Americans and American groups she's labeling domestic threats. She won't say who's on it. She won't say how you get on it. She won't say how you get off it. And when Congress, whose literal job is oversight, asked to see it, she said the quiet part out loud. You don't get anything. Visceral. Egregious. And the public safety excuse? Demonstrably false as a blanket shield for secrecy. Because if you're operating within legal limits, oversight is not a threat. It's the point. Last week, Bondi appeared before the House Judiciary Committee for her first oversight hearing. That's where members of Congress question the Attorney General under oath about what the Justice Department is doing. And Congresswoman Gay Scanlon of Pennsylvania asked a very simple question tied to a very specific directive. NSPM 7, a presidential memorandum signed on September 25, 2025, supposedly about domestic terrorism. Scanlon lays out why people across the political spectrum were alarmed. The memo blurs the line between unlawful conduct and constitutionally protected speech and activity, and it talks about investigate, prosecute, and dismantle groups described, without evidence, as an organized campaign of radical left terrorism. She also points out a key fact. The statute defining domestic terrorism requires criminal acts, not beliefs, not vibes, not hostility to someone's politics. So then she goes straight to what the memo ordered, a list of groups or entities the Attorney General recommends be treated as domestic terrorist organizations. And what followed is one of the most revealing 5 minutes you'll see from this Congress, because Bondi doesn't just dodge. She confirms the framework, refuses transparency, and tries to turn oversight into an insult.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bondi, I'm here. On September 25th, President Trump signed a memorandum known as NSPM 7, purporting to address domestic terrorism. But Americans across the political spectrum were immediately alarmed by the memo's blurring of the line between unlawful conduct and constitutionally protected speech and activity, as well as its call to investigate, prosecute, and dismantle groups that the president and Stephen Miller described without evidence as, quote, an organized campaign of radical left terrorism. Now, counterterrorism experts were further alarmed by the administration's singular focus on left-wing extremism, combined with the sudden deletion from the DOJ website of decades of research and law enforcement analysis, which had concluded that right-wing extremism poses the greatest terrorism threat to Americans. The president's memo broadly and vaguely links violent conduct to ideologies, and it targeted specifically anti-American, anti-Christian, and anti-capitalist beliefs, as well as, quote, hostility to so-called traditional American views on family, religion, and morality, end quote. President Trump has repeatedly and openly, however falsely, tried to brand his political opponents with these sentiments listed in his memo. But as you know, as a lawyer, holding beliefs that the White House disagrees with is not a crime. And the statute defining domestic terrorism requires criminal acts, not just thoughts and ideas. That's why legal experts, nonprofit leaders, religious freedom, and civil rights advocates immediately raised the alarm that the new presidential directive was a politically motivated attack on civil society designed to silence those who disagree with the administration. So, Ms. Bondi, Section 3 of that memo directed you, as Attorney General, to submit to the President and Stephen Miller a list of groups or entities whose members are engaged in acts that meet the definition of domestic terrorism. And then on December 4th, you directed the FBI to work with a variety of law enforcement entities to compile a list of groups and entities engaged in such acts by January 3rd, 2026, and to update that report every 30 days thereafter. So can we assume that you or persons under your direction at the Department of Justice have prepared that list of groups or entities who are designated as domestic terrorist organizations? And I just remind you, that's a yes or no question. Did you
Well,
prepare
I'm not
the
going to
list?
answer it yes or no, but what I will say is I know Antifa is part of that.
Okay.
I will talk to you about
I'm
that.
reclaiming
and on
my time.
February
I
5th,
asked you
2025,
whether you
an
prepared
Antifa member
a
was
list.
arrested in Minneapolis
I'm
federal
reclaiming
court for
my
cyber
time.
stalking.
Did you
they
have
ask
a
a question and
list?
don't want an answer.
The answer is yes or no.
Time belongs to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania. Gentlelady can proceed.
Okay. So will you commit to providing this committee with any list of organizations that you have recommended be designated as domestic terrorist organizations?
We will comply with the law in all matters.
Will you commit to provide this committee with your list of entities that you recommend be designated as domestic terrorist organizations?
I'm not going to commit to anything to you because you won't let me answer questions.
Okay, well then, we do understand that your current position is that you have a secret list of people or groups that you are accusing of domestic terrorism, but you won't share it with Congress. And I'd remind you that when the U.S. government designates an entity as a foreign terrorist organization, it must report that to Congress and to the entity, because the government can make a mistake and the entity has the opportunity to contest it. So your position seems to be that if you falsely designate an American or an American organization as a terrorist group, there's nothing they can do about it. I think we get it. You don't want to answer the
No,
question.
you don't get anything regarding public safety.
Thank you.
Nothing.
Thank you for the insult. It's clear you didn't come to Congress prepared to answer questions that the American people have every right to have answered. But if you were prepared to answer truthfully, here's what we expect the facts to show. The administration is keeping lists of Americans who the White House says are engaged in domestic terrorism. Those lists could include Americans who have not committed any acts of terrorism, but simply disagree with this administration, people like Renee Good and Alex Preddy. And your list may include clergy, elected officials, and members of indivisible groups across the country. And those lists likely don't include Proud Boys or Oath Keepers who were actually convicted. Americans have never tolerated political demagogues who use the government to punish people on an enemies list. It brought down McCarthy, it brought down Nixon, and it will bring down this administration as well.
And you're right.
Yield back.
That's why we're so glad they rescinded the memorandum targeting parents.
If you watched that and felt like you just watched a government official shrug off the concept of legal requirements, you're right. Because Scanlon asked yes or no, did you prepare the list? And Bondi's response was not transparency. It was a pivot to name-dropping Antifa like it's September 2020 again. That is not an answer. That is a strategy. It's content. It's B-roll. It's the political version of pulling a fire alarm so nobody hears the question. And then when pressed, will you provide the list to this committee? Bondi retreats into the vaguest possible phrase, we will comply with the law. But notice what she doesn't say. She doesn't say the list doesn't exist. She doesn't say Congress can have it. She doesn't say there's a process to contest being labeled. Instead, she escalates into contempt. I'm not going to commit to anything to you. And when Scanlon summarizes what that means, you have a secret list and you won't share it with oversight, Bondi's reply is basically, you don't get anything. That is stonewalling. That is goalpost moving. And it's exactly how you build a system where labels punish people without charges. Now here's what makes this so much worse, using the information you already heard, but connected in a way the hearing clip can't fully do on its own. First, the legal framework. The United States does have a formal process for designating foreign terrorist organizations, and under that process, there's notice, reporting, and the ability to contest, because the government can make mistakes and the consequences are huge. That's the core of Scanlon's point. Even foreign groups get more procedural structure than what Bondi is describing here for Americans. But according to the legal experts you referenced, people who actually do national security law for a living, there is no established legal authority for creating an official domestic terrorist organization designation system that operates like the foreign one. In plain English, domestic terrorism is defined in law, yes, but here's an official domestic terrorist list is not some clean standardized, due process heavy system that Congress has blessed and courts have clearly approved. So when Bondi acts like this list is routine and oversight is the problem, that's backwards. Oversight is the only thing standing between labeling and abuse. Second, what NSPM 7 is targeting. The memo doesn't just say go after people who commit violence. It links domestic terrorism to ideologies, anti-American, anti-capitalist, anti-Christian, and hostility to traditional views on family, religion, and morality. And that's where the First Amendment alarm should be screaming in your head, because holding beliefs the White House disagrees with is not a crime. Criticizing Christianity is not a crime. Being anti-capitalist is not a crime. Having non-traditional views on family or morality is not a crime. What Bondi is helping construct is a world where protected beliefs become risk indicators, and risk indicators become threat labels, and threat labels become financial punishment, surveillance attention, audits, and reputational destruction. That's how you criminalize compliance. Institutions comply with the scary label just to protect themselves, and ordinary people pay the price. Third, the credibility problem. What the administration deleted versus what it's now claiming. You highlighted that the DOJ quietly deleted research that concluded right-wing extremism has posed the greatest terrorism threat to Americans. And then, conveniently, the memo's spotlight swings hard to radical left terrorism. Let's call that what it is, a narrative rewrite. Not updated research, not new findings, just deletion, then a new political memo that points the camera in the direction they want. That's not law enforcement, that's propaganda with a badge. Fourth, Bondi's own words. You cited her confirmation hearing pledge from January 2025. There will never be an enemies list within the Department of Justice. And now, 13 months later, she's in Congress refusing to share a list of who the administration is labeling domestic threats. That's not a small inconsistency. That's the entire story. Because this isn't about whether you personally like one group or dislike another. This is about whether the government can build a secret enemies list, slap national security on it, and then act offended when oversight asks to see it. Here's why this is worse than it looks. The label does the damage even if it's not enforceable in the neat courtroom sense. A designation can become a social weapon. Banks don't want risk, platforms don't want controversy, employers don't want headlines, donors don't want trouble. So once the government starts hinting that certain groups are domestic threats, everybody else starts acting like the verdict is already in. You don't need a conviction. You don't even need an accusation with evidence. You just need the government to point quietly and let everyone else do the punishing. That's the shakedown. And the chilling effect you referenced, that's not an accident. That's a feature. People stop speaking. People stop donating. People stop organizing. People stop showing up. And that's how you dismantle civil society without ever proving a crime. So what does this mean for you? It means if you've ever donated to a nonprofit that advocates for immigration reform, climate action, criminal justice reform, reproductive rights, anything that the administration doesn't like, you could be supporting something they want to label a domestic threat. It means if you attend a church that doesn't match whatever they consider traditional family, religion, and morality, your community could end up flagged. It means activists, clergy, elected officials, and ordinary members of local groups could be smeared by association without ever being charged with anything. And you might never know because the list is secret. It's like getting a parking ticket that's also classified. You're punished, but you don't get the evidence, you don't get the process, and you don't even get to know you've been accused. This is why people keep invoking the McCarthy era. Because secret lists and political labeling are the oldest trick in the authoritarian playbook. You don't have to outlaw dissent. You just have to brand dissent as dangerous, and then let fear do the rest. And Scanlon's warning matters. Americans have never tolerated political demagogues using government power to punish people on an enemies list forever. McCarthy fell. Nixon fell. Not because they were polite, but because eventually the abuses became too visible to ignore. The question is how much damage happens first, how many people get chilled into silence before accountability catches up again. Here's where things stand in plain English. The administration ordered the Attorney General to compile a list of groups or entities tied to domestic terrorism. Bondi effectively confirms such a list exists, but refuses to share it with Congress. The memo's targeting language sweeps in ideologies and beliefs that are constitutionally protected, not crimes. There is no clear, transparent due process pathway for Americans or American organizations to contest being labeled. Bondi previously promised there would never be an enemies list, yet here we are watching her defend secrecy like it's a virtue. That is egregious, that is dangerous, and it is absolutely not public safety to keep a secret threat list beyond oversight. If this breakdown helped you understand what's happening underneath the clip, beyond the viral moment, support independent media. Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next deep dive. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Should Congress subpoena the list, yes or no? And share this with someone who still thinks it can't happen here, because it can, and it is.